About a year ago, I was living with one of my mates. I stayed in a ground floor flat that kind of sits in a cul-de-sac and is a bit of a pain to walk to. It's kind of detached from the community. The only times I felt completely safe there were during sunlight hours, depending on the time of year, of course. The block of flats is arranged in an L-like shape. Our entrance sits right inside the 90-degree angle. Inside the main building, there's a flat either side and stairs in front. The immediate entrance hall is very dark. I feel like the lights kinda choose when and when not they feel like working sometimes. The flats are all very basic. A hallway, 2 small double bedrooms, a bathroom, a decent living room, and a small kitchen. The hallway itself is quite long, and the living room is right at the end of it. Both bedrooms face each other, so we could talk to each other from within our doorways. If that makes sense. I'm telling you all this to help you picture the incident. It was around 11 o'clock or 11:30 at night perhaps. My flatmate was in her room, presumably asleep. She had this bad habit of leaving things unlocked every now and then. I always have to get up and make sure everything is locked up before I head off to sleep. But she'd gotten better about it, and normally at least had the chain on the door if she'd forgotten the main lock. She always went to bed pretty early, so I didn't really mind having to do this. I was in the living room and decided to grab a pint of water before heading to bed myself. I went into the kitchen, which was attached to the living room. I switched on the kitchen light and filled up a glass. The car park in front of our flat was very dark, and I remember this eerie feeling coming over me. I couldn't quite say why. I just felt like something was really off here. The kind of feeling you get when you switch the light off and feel the need to run up the stairs. Anyway, I took a couple sips and filled the glass a little more, then went to head out of the kitchen. To my surprise, I heard the front doorbell ring. I froze. I didn't even know we had a doorbell. That tells you how many visitors we usually got. About 10 seconds passed before the letterbox was hit twice and my stomach sank. I felt trapped in the kitchen. Important to note 2 things here. If you step out of the kitchen area, it puts you in perfect line with the hallway if the living room door is open, which it was. And 2, our front door had a bloody window on it, so you could see the silhouettes of anyone outside or in. We did have a cute gray curtain across the front, but it was pretty see-through. I grabbed my phone and called my mate who was in her room, right next to the front door. "Did you hear that?" We were both wondering if we had just imagined it. We had to whisper because the walls were paper thin. You could always hear people coming and going. She crept out to her bedroom doorway, but couldn't go forward because then she'd be in direct sight of the window. I edged my way out of the kitchen, keeping flat against the wall. I sunk down to the floor, texting her now because we were closer to the door. We didn't want whoever was outside to hear us. Another thing you should note is this person must have buzzed other flats to get into the building, because they sure didn't buzz ours. I reckon they must have seen me through the kitchen window. Lying in a kind of army crawl, I could see the silhouette of a tall, bald man. He chapped the letterbox again, but just stood there. Terrified, I mouthed to my mate, "Did you remember to lock the door?" She said no. The chain wasn't on the door either. It was now or never, I supposed. I crawled as low as I could to my bedroom, grabbed my keys, and crawled over to the door. I frantically shoved the keys in and twisted, at the same time putting the chain on. It was a noisy affair, and obviously the man noticed I was there now. As I desperately tried to twist the crappy old-school key into the lock, I finally got it. I was terrified to stand up. My mate poked her head out of her room to see if he wasn't there anymore. She was kind of half stoned, so she kind of fell asleep and went back to bed. But something was nagging at me though, really badly. Remember how I said you could easily hear people coming and going? Well, it was really quiet, and not once did either of us hear the building's main door open or close. This was someone who was from our building. We had one person across from us, two people above us, and two above them. Two of those flats were students. Our neighbor was a 98-year-old woman. It was a couple with a short, long-haired and chill guy, so nobody we knew lived there matched the frame of the man in our flat window. I stayed up until I couldn't anymore, keeping my room door shut and keeping my hockey stick next to my bed. I realized about a month after this that the service button to the front main building was broken and anybody could come right in if they pressed it. If they were very quiet, you wouldn't even know they had slipped inside. I think the person must have saw me in the kitchen in the light and thought to try their luck that night. It easily could have been a different story had I not managed to lock the door in time. Always lock your doors, heck, double lock even, no matter how safe you reckon your area is. We have no idea to this day who that man was, nor why he was there. Obviously, we never saw him again, and we never heard anyone use our doorbell again. Now, I normally wouldn't share anything. I'm more of a silent lurker, but something happened to me the other night, and I figured I should contribute my own story about how I found out my neighbors were terrorists. I'm sure a lot of you already know this, as it's made its rounds in the news, but a few days ago on October 7th, 2020, there was an FBI raid on a trailer in Michigan. This story takes place on the night of that raid, around 7:30 p.m. My boyfriend was at home sleeping when I came home from work at around 6:45. I drove into our neighborhood and turned down the street to our house. All seemed normal as I went inside to rouse my sleeping boyfriend. We prepared to gather our things to go shopping. It took me a little while to wake him up, and we began to chat a bit about my day. As we were getting ready to leave our house and go, we were continuing the conversation we were having. We stepped out onto our front porch. That's when I noticed that we sounded much louder outside, and there were people standing at the end of the road. I stopped mid-sentence and realized how eerily quiet it was, aside from my boyfriend who was still talking. I tapped his shoulder and tried to draw his attention from locking our door to these mysterious people gathering in the street. We took a look around and noticed a police car on the other end just barely in view. There were two officers speaking to some men beside a large SUV. The SUV was a state car that was parked sideways and blocking the road. Initially, I took this as a sign that a mild neighborhood scuffle must have occurred and someone had called the police. It was a noteworthy thing, but not too uncommon for a mobile home park. We proceeded to our car, and I commented somewhat irritated that they'd better move the police car soon, as they were really blocking traffic. As we made our way out our driveway, another car turned down our street and headed up the road toward the police car. This gave us the confidence we needed as sheep to follow someone else toward the confrontation. As we slowly crawled up the street in our car, we watched the car in front of us stop and turn at a road that had been left unblocked, just in front of the police. We moved to this area somewhat recently and hadn't learned the ins and outs of every street yet. Unfortunately, that street was a dead end. As we rounded the corner to the dead-end street, I caught even more glimpses of police, and my irritation immediately melted into confusion and fear. I noticed they were all packing assault rifles and various weapons. It dawned on me as we made our way toward the end of the road that whatever the police they were doing here, it wasn't because of some small neighborly fight. I felt my anxiety rising. I started rambling about how they had guns, and why would they have so many weapons outside our house? As we turned the car around and came back upon the police blockade, they motioned silently for us to go back towards our house. We did so. We wanted to leave our neighborhood and find out what the hell was going on. We passed our house and turned down a different road, trying to go around. As we rounded the street, we were immediately greeted with more police and more armed men, this time people in full military uniform. I think my jaw dropped to the floor as the men approached our car. I really started freaking out at this point. I told my boyfriend to turn around and get us the hell out of there. As we turned around, I noticed out the passenger window that there was someone in handcuffs by the side of the house. He was looking right at us. I felt really sick. When we turned around, we finally found a road that led us out of the park and onto the main road. We got to the grocery store and recounted what just happened. It took me an hour to finally stop shaking and process everything. We thought it was crazy, sure, but assumed it was some kind of high-profile drug raid perhaps. We found out the next day, when the news broke, that there were multiple people arrested in a thwarted plot to kidnap the state governor. The raid had taken place right as we were leaving our house, and our dumbasses had no idea. The second time we pulled up on the police blockade, it was right outside the house the raid had taken place at. It made me really stop and reconsider everything that happened that night, and how suspicious we must have come across. I've had to come to terms with the fact that I lived right down the street from some domestic terrorists. I've made a point of figuring out multiple routes through our new neighborhood because I realized just how dangerous this could be in a more immediate emergency. I don't even want to think about what could have happened if they weren't stopped, and how much crazier that altercation could have been just down the street. In late 2020, I was working at a chain hotel off the interstate. I won't say which hotel, but it was a major brand. I was training a coworker for the night audit shift. She and I are both female and in our mid-20s. Around 3 a.m., after all the paperwork for the day was done, I decided to show her the different room types, starting with the largest suite up on the 3rd floor. Upon arriving on the 3rd floor, we got off the elevator and started walking down the hall. We noticed a man who was sweating profusely, just standing in the doorway of his room. He definitely seemed intoxicated at the very least. We walked by, greeting him as one does, and got no response at all. All of a sudden, I felt a fear that was really palpable. We got to the suite I was showing her, and as soon as the door shut behind us, I told her that guy was giving me a real weird vibe. I didn't think we should walk past him again to get back to the elevator. I suggested we instead continue down the hall to the stairs. As soon as we exited the room, we immediately noticed that not only was the man not back in his room, he was facing us and watching us. I whispered to her, "Take off your shoes. We're gonna run down the stairs and out to the parking lot, okay?" She agreed, and we took our shoes off at the top of the stairwell. We bolted down the steps and out into the lot. We entered back into the building through a different entrance and ran to the office to check the cameras. Sure enough, the man had chased down the steps after us and was now looking for us in the hallway and by the door to the parking area. We checked the reservation tied to the room number so I could inform my manager and tell them to place this person on the do not rent list. All I remember was that his name was something extraordinarily normal. So forgettable it may as well have just been John Smith or something. Jump forward to late 2021. I turn on the local news and see the very same man who chased us down the steps that night. His name was Anthony Robinson, now dubbed the shopping cart killer. He killed 2 women in Harrisonburg and 2 more that we know of in northern VA. He was known to utilize hotels to meet and then victimize women he was communicating with online. though I suppose he was not adverse to trying crimes of opportunity as well. That was my only close encounter, and definitely very scary in hindsight. I live in South Georgia, so things over here can be really shady. I go to this one Walmart all the time, and I've never had problems with it whatsoever. I'm a 21-year-old man, so it's kind of weird to imagine being followed anyways. Here we go with the story though. I was going shopping for some groceries, doing my usual thing. It was around 8:30 p.m. by the time I got done checking out. As I was walking out of the store though, I noticed this older gentleman giving me a real strange stare. I brushed it off initially until I'd noticed he'd followed me out to the parking lot and was still staring as I was putting my groceries in my car. I decided to kind of hurry up the pace. I can defend myself, I'm a pretty muscular guy, but I'm not exactly keen to get into a fight for no reason. I got in my car and started to drive away. Honestly, I thought that would be that. I got about a mile down the road when I noticed this black pickup truck pull up behind me and start riding right on my bumper. I slowed down and went off the road a little to let him pass by, except he didn't even try. He just kept pressed up right against me. I finally brake-checked him and he passed by, but as he was doing that, I noticed it was the very same old man from earlier. When he passed me, he brake-checked me too, and tried to get me to stop my car. This went on for 10 minutes, until I got very aggravated. I slipped into the other lane and sped by him. Finally, I was able to get home, seemingly having lost him in the meantime. I went inside and began to chill out, when a while later my Ring camera went off. I looked at the video from my phone, and that same man was out on my front porch. I called the police and they arrived pretty quickly, but he was already gone. There wasn't really anything they could do. This happened just last night, by the way, so I'm still kinda freaked out by the whole thing. Nearly 2 years ago, my husband and I moved to a pretty safe town. We decided to have some fun while we're young and child-free, so we got an apartment downtown. Honestly, it's been super fun. It's on top of a shopping center with restaurants, boutiques, a theater. There's all sorts of stuff to do. We've had a blast living here, and it's always felt like a very safe area. I like to go on walks myself. Since the area is so busy, I've always just walked here when I'm alone. I go on a walk about every other day, less so in the winter. Anyway, for these past 2 years, I'd been seeing this older man, always sitting in the shopping center. He always gave me a real bad feeling, so if I came upon him, I tried to divert my path. Still, the man had never done anything personally to me, so I felt a bit bad for judging him. Maybe I'm just paranoid, I thought to myself. Maybe he's old and lonely and just wants to be out around other people. Well, the other night I heard there was a shooting in the shopping center. It was around 10 o'clock at night. I never go out that late by myself, so I didn't even know about this until the next morning. It turns out that very same older man had attempted to abduct a woman in the shopping center at gunpoint. He assaulted her and tried to drive away with her. Her husband drove after them and thankfully managed to shoot the guy. She was rescued and the man was taken to jail. He admitted to the police that he had been observing the woman near the shopping center to pick out victims. I can't tell you how many times in the past 2 years I saw that man watching me. How many times I felt guilty for feeling uncomfortable around him. How many times I was right in his path. How many times he sought me out as his target. I guess I was just lucky in the end. Always trust your gut. When I was about 6 years old, in kindergarten or first grade, I can't exactly remember which, we lived right across the street from my school, and I mean right across the street. From our front room window, the school property was the majority of what could be seen. I went to this school until my second grade year, when the school was shut down by the district, and the kids were shipped off to whatever school happened to be closest to them. The abandoned property became a community center of sorts for the town. By the way, less than 200 people live here. I won't name drop the town, but I will say it's somewhere in rural Illinois. The estimated 200-person figure was in 1989, and there are considerably fewer people now. Most of the population eventually moved away or died, and several of the houses have burned down. Today, the town is even more dried up than it was during my kindergarten years, and the last time I visited, it looked as though nature was in the process of reclaiming it. I say all of this because it's important you understand just how small this town was. People didn't just randomly show up there. Strangers would be immediately recognized. There was nowhere for them to hide because the town only had 3 streets. All but the end of one of them led out of town, and the lone end of the lone street that didn't offer an escape route led right to a dead end with an ancient cemetery. The town had nothing but a post office, a couple of abandoned buildings that I'm certain used to be general stores, and a single payphone. Today, the post office is closed down, and the payphone is gone. Keep all this in mind when I say that a stranger or creep would have been noticed immediately. It's surprising to note then that I was almost abducted by a stranger in that very same town, from directly in front of the school in fact. Actually, I was abducted. That's the strangest thing. I remember when I left school that day, there was a man standing in front of a vehicle, and he greeted me directly by name. The man knew my name, and he told me my mom had sent him to pick me up for some reason or another. The memory of what he actually said is a bit hazy, but it amounted to something like, "Your mom isn't at home, so she sent me to pick you up and take you to where she is. Get in and we'll go for a ride." You know, the usual creeper thing. And I did. There are certain details I don't remember from this point. Why didn't I just look across the street to see if my mom's car was in our driveway? Maybe I did. Where did we go? I can't remember. What happened? I can't remember much of that either. I only have the briefest of memories of me sitting in the passenger seat of his vehicle, saying something as we drove out of town. Can't remember what he said. Can't even remember what he looked like. There's just a large chunk of my memory that's blocked out. Maybe he took me somewhere and did something to me, and I just locked it up inside. I sure hope not. I hope he was some aspiring kidnapper with a conscience who couldn't accept the enormity of the sin he was about to commit, because eventually he just took me back home. I hope that nothing bad happened to me, that my lack of memory is more due to the entire sequence of events being so uneventful that my developing little brain felt no need to keep it in storage. A few years back, I actually asked my mom about it, just to make sure I hadn't imagined the whole thing. "Hey, do you remember when that strange man took me from school and brought me back?" Oh, yeah. Apparently I told her what happened, because she told me how she went over to the school and began freaking out about it. That's all I have to prove to myself it even happened. Up until then, I had wondered if I'd just imagined the whole thing. Who was the man? How did he know my name? Why did he take me? And most importantly, why did he just bring me back? What even happened that day that I can't remember? It might not be the most traditionally scary story, but knowing there was a real monster who almost gobbled me up when I was 6 years old and lost his appetite for some reason is more horrifying than I can even imagine. This haunts me even now, and when I think back, my blood runs a little cold. This was around 2006 or 2007, when I was around 12 or so. My best friend and I lived about 10 minutes apart, and we used to walk it all the time, together and apart. Our neighborhood was safe, and much like a suburb. We'd been hanging out one afternoon at my house, and it was time for her to go home. It was about 5 p.m. and was still summertime, so there was still light out. We left to walk to her house, and then I would walk back home alone. It was one long straight road between our houses, and quite a steep hill which curved to the right. Her house was a few houses in at the top. It was a very residential area, and there were many houses on both sides of the road. We left my house and chatted as we walked. We walked past an alleyway, which was fine. We used to walk to school down there and didn't notice anything weird. We made our way through a bunch of overhanging trees, and again, nothing weird so far. We were now at the bottom of the hill and about to start walking up. We began the trek upward when my friend suddenly turned around and whispered to me, "There's two guys behind us." I turned around. I was surprised to see that in fact there were. They were a good distance back though, so I wasn't too worried yet. We carried on walking when my friend turned around again. "They're getting closer." I turned around to look. They were much closer now. We picked up the pace and were further up the hill, about halfway up. The next part happened so quickly. My friend turned around and I did too. Both the men put balaclavas over their faces and started to run towards us. My friend and I started running for our lives. We could hear them chasing behind us, getting closer and closer. I've never felt that rush of adrenaline since, and never run so fast either. Like I said before, my friend lived at the top of the hill, so all we needed to do was get to her house. We ran around the corner and arrived, hammering on the door as her mom was home. She opened the door as she was in the kitchen and could see us running. She shouted something at the men chasing us, and we then collapsed inside her house. It's one of those what-if moments I think about a lot. What if we hadn't managed to outrun them? What if we had been wearing headphones? What if my friend's house was a little bit further? Would we still be here? They're already weirdos for chasing two preteen girls, but the fact they put balaclavas on meant they probably meant business. I'm 27 now, and I still get freaked out about how creepy that was, and how close they got to grabbing us. So this is the story of a mysterious key, Waldo, and a gaggle of middle school students. In middle school, we went on a trip to Washington, D.C. It was a fantastic and quite different experience from Oregon. The malls especially. We were in this really nice mall eating in the food court when I saw two darkly dressed men standing near the elevator. It's been years, but I remember them saying something along the lines of, "The key to the thing at the place with the stuff is under one of the chairs there. It has a broken hairband attached to it." I just thought it was weird as they walked away, but later when I pushed my chair in after eating, my heart just about stopped. I noticed that sitting there on the floor was a shiny silver key with a broken hair tie attached to it. My friends were already walking away. I couldn't say anything to them, so I did the stupid thing and picked up this mysterious key. I waited until we were on the bus to tell them what happened. My friend's boyfriend bravely offered to hold on to the key and tied it to his shoe. A day or so later, we were walking around D.C., and I noticed this guy dressed up like Waldo from Where's Waldo. I didn't think on it too much until I realized that he was following us all around. Terrified, we stuck close to our group. I didn't have the heart to tell my friends that as we were walking around that day, I saw that guy talking to the same two darkly dressed men from the mall. A few days later, we were at Busch Gardens, the amusement park. It was getting pretty late and it was just about deserted. This place was a few hours away from where we were staying before. I think we actually drove most of the night to get there. I suppose you can imagine my horror when I saw Waldo there. He followed our group closely the entire time, getting on every single ride that we did. It was absolutely terrifying, and we weren't sure if we could tell our teacher. If we did, would she even believe us? I saw him talking to those two darkly dressed men there too. And that's when I told my group. The boy who was holding the key got an idea. He walked into sight of the two men and Waldo, right across the food area of a building. The boy took the key from his shoe, and then, in the most convincing manner he could, pretended to swallow it. He held it in his mouth for an hour as they continued to follow us. We didn't want to alert them to the fact it had been faked. Eventually, they stopped following us. We thought we were safe, but the boy continued to hold on to that key. It had become a pretty funny story to us by the end of the trip, until the return flight, when we saw Waldo on our plane. Luckily, we never did see him again after. The boy still has that key, and to this very day, 5 years later, I'm terrified something will happen to him because of his possession of it. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.